The noise of the airplane's engine has always been a comforting sound to me. It reminded me that I was in motion, going somewhere, a new destination, a new adventure. But at that moment, all I wanted was for it to stop. The trip had been planned for months. My coworkers and I would finally escape the exhausting routine and spend a week in a tropical paradise. We laughed, making plans about what we would do as soon as we landed. But then, everything changed. First, there was a strong turbulence, the kind that makes flight attendants exchange worried glances. The seatbelt sign echoed through the cabin, and the air, once filled with excitement, became dense with uncertainty. Then came the jolt. The plane shook violently, and a red light began to flash on the panel. I looked around, searching for some kind of confirmation that this was normal. But when I saw the pale expression of the flight attendant next to me, I knew it wasn't. A deafening noise filled the cabin, followed by a scream. The plane began to lose altitude. My body was thrown against the seat, and the screams of panic mixed with the sound of alarms. "Are we going to crash?" I whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it real. Someone squeezed my hand. I don't know who it was. I don't know if I squeezed back. Everything was happening too fast. The pilot was saying something over the intercom, but the words were drowned out by the chaos. Oxygen masks fell from the ceiling. My hands trembled as I tried to pull one for myself. Then, an impact. It wasn't immediate. First, a sudden drop, my stomach turning. Then, a roar. Water. Cold. Aggressive. Swallowing everything. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just felt the crushing weight of the ocean around me. And then, darkness. The world returned in pieces. A bright light burned my closed eyes. The sound of waves crashing on the sand sounded distant, as if it were coming from a dream. My head throbbed, and every part of my body felt heavy, as if I were being pulled back into the darkness. But then, one detail seeped through the fog, the smell of salt. I opened my eyes suddenly, coughing up salt water, my chest burning. I was lying on the sand, the tide still licking my legs. My fingers sank into the fine grains, trying to find some sense of reality. I took a deep breath, tasting the mix of fear and survival. The plane, the crash. I sat up with a jolt, ignoring the pain radiating from every muscle in my body. I looked around, blinking to clear the dizziness. The wreckage was scattered across the beach, twisted parts of the fuselage, broken seats, open and soaked suitcases, and bodies. The air left my lungs. Some were moving, coughing, trying to get up. Others were not. The knot in my throat tightened, and the impulse to run and help made me stumble forward. Then I saw him. Standing a little away from the group, he watched the scene as if he had been there before, as if he already knew exactly what would come next. Sun-kissed skin, disheveled dark hair, a torn shirt revealing a cut on his arm. But it was the eyes that made me stop. Deep, intense, filled with something I couldn't decipher. He bent down to rummage through an open suitcase on the ground, pulling out a belt and a shirt that he used to improvise a tourniquet on his own arm. His movements were firm, practical. No panic, no hesitation. He knew what he was doing. My eyes scanned the other survivors. Many were crying, shouting for help. An older man was trying to revive an unconscious woman. Another person held their face in their hands, murmuring something repeatedly. But not him. He was calm. And that terrified me even more. The sun was low on the horizon when we realized that no one would come to rescue us anytime soon. Fear was still etched on everyone's faces. Desperation, uncertainty. I felt it too. A suffocating feeling that at any moment I would wake up from this nightmare and be safe at home. But it wasn't a nightmare. It was real. And he was still there. The man with the intense gaze and firm posture. While the others debated what to do, he wasted no time. He gathered dry branches and piled them up in what seemed to be an attempt to start a fire. When one of the survivors asked how he planned to light it without a lighter, he simply raised an eyebrow as if the question were stupid. "Fire is not a luxury," he replied. "It's a necessity." And then, with a patience that seemed infinite, he began to rub two pieces of wood together. Night fell quickly, and with it, the cold. The warmth of the day had vanished, replaced by a biting breeze that made my skin prickle. We were all wet, exhausted, and vulnerable. The fire was our only chance to maintain at least some measure of safety. I moved closer, watching him. His nimble fingers, the tense muscles, the focused expression, as if this was more than just fire, as if it was a personal battle. "You've done this before." My voice came out low but firm. He didn't look at me immediately. He just continued his task until, with a snap that felt almost magical, a small flame was born among the twigs. He shielded it with his hands, nurturing it carefully until the fire finally illuminated the darkness around us. It was then that he raised his eyes to me. "I have," he responded simply. Something in the way he said it sent chills down my spine more than the cold wind. He didn't seem lost, like us. He didn't seem scared or desperate. He seemed ready. And that left me with an insistent question in my mind. Who the hell was this man? Dawn brought a heavy silence, interrupted only by the sound of waves crashing on the beach. The few survivors were scattered, some sitting in the sand, hugging their knees, others rummaging through the wreckage in search of something useful. The heat was becoming a real problem. Thirst was even worse, and he was already taking action. While the others hesitated, caught between shock and the hope of immediate rescue, he walked along the beach with determined steps, observing, calculating, as if he were already mapping every inch of that place. "We need to explore the island," he announced, without really asking for opinions. Someone protested, saying we should stay where we were, waiting for rescuers. But he just shook his head. "If they come, great. But what if they don't?" His gaze cut through everyone around him, firm, challenging. "Sitting here, we die faster." No one knew how to respond. I didn't want to admit it, but he was right. The forest was dense, humid, full of shadows moving around us. The group moved slowly, stumbling over roots and pushing branches out of the way. The heat was suffocating and the heavy air clung to our skin like a second layer. He led without needing to give orders. It was instinctive. He knew where to step, knew where to look. And against my will, I found myself watching him. "You act like you've been here before," I commented, trying to ignore the sweat running down my neck. He didn't stop walking, but his response came dry. "Not here. But I've been in places like this." "What does that mean exactly?" This time he stopped. He looked at me as if weighing whether he should respond or not. "Do you really want to know?" Something in the way he said that made me hesitate. Because for the first time, I realized that I might not be ready for the answer. But one thing was certain. The longer time passed, the clearer it became that this man was not just any survivor. He was different. And somehow, I knew that this would change everything. The heat was unbearable, the kind that clung to the skin, making every movement an effort. Thirst burned my throat, and hunger made my stomach contract painfully. And he remained in control. Every decision, every unspoken command, every incisive glance. He didn't ask for permission for anything. He just did, as if he were programmed for it. Food was scarce. We found some small, bitter fruits, but not enough for everyone. When one of the survivors suggested we divide it equally, he was blunt. "We can't spend what we have now. We'll need more before nightfall." "Then let's go out and get more," I retorted, crossing my arms. He looked at me, and something glinted in his gaze. A silent interest, as if he had been waiting for me to react this way. "Do you know where to look?" His voice was calm, but it carried a subtle challenge. I narrowed my eyes. "And do you know?" He smiled. For the first time since we woke up on that beach, he smiled. And, to my irritation, it wasn't an ordinary smile. It was as if he was enjoying my resistance. "I know enough to keep us alive," he said, without a hint of modesty. Something inside me boiled. "You know what else keeps people alive?" "Teamwork," I shot back. "But you seem to prefer to give orders and expect others to just follow." He tilted his head as if considering my words. For a second, I thought he would respond with something as cutting as his gaze. But then he did something unexpected. He took a step toward me. The distance between us disappeared in seconds. My heart raced, my body tensed. Not because I was afraid, but because he was too close. Close enough for me to feel the warmth radiating from him, to notice every detail, the firm jaw, the eyes that examined me as if they were testing me. "If you think you can do better, His voice came low, almost intimate. Go ahead. It was a challenge, clear as day. And damn, I wanted to accept it. But before I could say anything, he stepped back, as if he had never been so close. And then he simply moved on, leaving behind only the memory of the moment. And an irritating certainty within me, I was completely involved in this game, even without understanding the rules. The storm came without warning. The wind ripped leaves from the trees, drove the waves crashing hard against the beach, and soaked the ground in minutes. The makeshift shelter he had built was knocked down as if it were made of paper. Panic set in. The survivors ran in opposite directions, trying to protect themselves, trying to hold on to the little they still had. The sound of thunder exploded in the sky, and a lightning bolt illuminated the darkness for a brief second. That's when I realized I was alone. My breath became heavy. My heart raced. The heavy rain pounded against my face, and the muddy ground made my feet sink. I looked around, trying to find someone, anyone, but all I saw were distorted shadows in the darkness. I shouted, but the wind carried my voice away. I tried to run, but the storm seemed to push me back. My legs trembled and fear tightened my chest. I couldn't stay there. I had to. A firm hand grabbed my arm. My body reacted before my mind. I tried to pull away, but then I saw the eyes. Those eyes. It was him. Before I could say anything, he pulled me forcefully. Come on. His voice was almost inaudible above the noise of the rain. You can't stay here. I should have complained, should have said that I could very well manage on my own. But at that moment, the only thing I felt was relief. He led me to a corner protected by rocks, where the wind was less aggressive. The space was tight, and the heat of our bodies mixed with the cold that insisted on enveloping us. My breath was quickening, not just from fear, but from the proximity. He looked at me differently now, not with that challenging tone from before, but with something deeper. I thought that. My voice faltered, and I swallowed hard. He ran his wet hand over his face, averting his gaze for a second, as if he were battling something inside him. Then finally, he said, I would never leave you behind. And for some reason, the storm inside me was stronger than the one outside. The storm took a while to pass. The wind still howled in the distance, and the fine rain persisted, dripping from the leaves of the trees. But inside our little makeshift shelter among the rocks, there was only silence. He sat with his back to me, his arms resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the darkness of the forest. I watched him without really knowing why. Maybe because for the first time, he seemed less unreachable. I took a deep breath before breaking the silence. You've been through something like this before, haven't you? He didn't react immediately. His shoulders rose slightly with his breath, and for a moment I thought he would just ignore me. But then, he turned his face toward me, and there was something in his eyes that made me catch my breath. Pain. Yes, he replied, his voice quieter than usual. My heart raced. He never said much about himself. He never let anything slip. But now it seemed he was about to let me see a piece of who he really was. What happened? I asked, hesitantly. He ran his hand through his wet hair and let out a slow sigh. I've been trapped in a place like this before, he started, his voice hoarse, laden with memories. And I didn't get out alone. I waited, feeling each beat of my heart. I tried to save someone, he continued. I did everything I could, but it wasn't enough. The words hung between us, heavy as the humid air around us. My throat tightened. He always acted as if nothing could touch him, as if he were made of steel. But now, for the first time, he seemed human. Hurt. That's why you reacted like that when the plane crashed, I murmured. That's why you knew exactly what to do. He looked at me, and something inside me twisted. I wouldn't make the same mistakes, he said, with raw conviction. Not this time. There were so many things I wanted to say, but none of them felt sufficient. So all I did was hold his hand. A light touch, almost uncertain. And for the first time, he didn't pull away. The days on the island began to blur together. Time seemed to slip through my fingers. Always the same endless blue sky, the same smell of salt and humidity, the same suffocating heat that made me long for the night. But one thing had changed. Him. After that storm, after what he confessed, something broke between us. Or maybe something was formed. I couldn't explain it. But he no longer avoided me. He didn't look at me as just a mere survivor who needed to be guided. Now, he was truly looking at me. And it made my heart stumble every time. Faster. His voice sounded firm, low behind me. I was already tired, my knees sinking into the sand, trying to do what he had been doing for days with such ease. Fire. I'm trying, I muttered through clenched teeth, feeling the sweat trickle down my temple. He crouched down beside me so close that his breath brushed against my skin. Then try properly, he said, taking my hands in his. My body froze. It was a simple touch. Just his warm skin against mine, guiding my movements. But the impact was immediate. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the shiver that ran down my spine. Relax, he murmured. Relax? How, exactly? The tension between us was palpable. The heat from the unfinished fire didn't come close to the heat building beneath my skin. He noticed. I could tell by the way his grip softened, by how his fingers lingered a second longer than necessary on mine. When he released my hand, I was no longer the same. And by the way he looked at me before pulling away, he knew it too. The forest was darker than usual when we started to head back to the beach. The day had been exhausting. We had walked for hours searching for something useful, some hint of drinkable water or food. We found some fruit, but nothing that really changed our situation. And then the rain came. It started as a timid drizzle, which soon turned into a downpour. Within minutes, we were soaked, our feet sinking into the mud, and the thunder tearing the sky above us. We need to take shelter, he said, looking around with trained eyes. I nodded, shivering from the cold. He found a cave not far from there, hidden among the rocks. We ran inside, our breaths quickened by the effort. The sound of the storm was muffled by the stone walls, but the cold didn't leave us. My clothes clung to my skin, heavy, and every movement felt impossible. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to warm up. You're shaking, he noted. I laughed, a short, humorless sound. And you're not? He didn't respond. He just moved closer. My heart raced even before he touched me. You need to warm up. His voice was hoarse. Then, without giving me time to protest, he wrapped his arms around me. My breath caught. He was warm, even wet, even with the storm raging outside. I felt the firm weight of his body, the heat of his skin against my soaked clothes, and everything inside me became chaotic. Every beat of my heart, every shiver, every drop of water sliding down my skin, making everything even more intense. I could feel his breath in my hair, the way his muscles were tense, as if he were fighting against something. And I knew exactly what it was, because I was fighting too. But in that dark cave, with the rain pouring heavily outside and his heat burning against me, I wasn't sure anymore if I wanted to win this battle. The rain showed no signs of stopping. The drops slid down the entrance of the cave, reflecting the weak light of the storm. The wind howled outside, but in here, the real hurricane was something else. He was still close. Too close. I could feel the heat of his body, the weight of his touch still on my skin. My heart was pounding so loudly it seemed to fill the space between us. And by the way he looked at me, I knew he felt the same. That's when he pulled away. That was a mistake, he murmured, turning his back. The shock came before the anger. A mistake? I repeated, incredulous. He ran his hand over his face, as if trying to compose himself, as if he were trying to rebuild the barrier I had been slowly tearing down. This can't happen, he said without looking at me. My fists clenched. Why? Because you're afraid? This time he looked at me, and for a second I saw something fierce in his gaze. It's not fear. It's survival, he replied, his voice low, laden with something I couldn't decipher. That hit me like a cold wave. So that's it? You'd rather go through all this alone? Think you can carry everything without needing anyone? He laughed, but there was no humor in his laugh. Needing someone just makes everything harder. That was the last straw. I stepped closer before he could pull away again, before he could run. Then stop fighting it, I whispered. The silence between us was electric. And then he stopped. His eyes darkened, his jaw clenched. The storm outside seemed insignificant compared to what was happening inside that cave. When he finally pulled me close, the impact was like a lightning strike. The kiss was not gentle. It wasn't hesitant. It was a collision. A meeting of repressed desire, of all the unspoken words, of every loaded glance. My hands found their way to his neck. His fingers tightened around my waist. We were both desperate, as if we were fighting for oxygen, as if that moment was our only certainty in an uncertain world. And no matter how much he tried to deny it, in that instant, he wanted me as much as I wanted him. The morning brought a strange silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind only the smell of wet earth and fallen leaves. But inside the cave, the real chaos was not what the rain had left. It was what had happened between us. He was already standing when I opened my eyes. His gaze was fixed on the entrance of the cave, jaw tense, shoulders rigid, as if he were ready to fight something, or flee. And I knew before he even said anything. "It was a mistake," he said, not meeting my gaze. Those words were a punch to the gut. I sat up slowly, trying to ignore how my heart tightened inside my chest. "A mistake?" My voice came out low but sharp. He ran a hand through his hair, letting out a heavy sigh. It shouldn't have happened. I felt the heat rising in my face. A mix of anger and disbelief. "Do you really believe that?" I challenged. This time he looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't indifference. It wasn't regret. It was fear. Not of me, but of what had happened. Of what it meant. I stood up, crossing my arms. "You can repeat that as many times as you want, but it won't change what happened." My voice came out firmer than I expected. "What is happening?" He clenched his jaw, looking away. "I can't what? Feel something?" I stepped closer, and he held his breath. "Because if that's it, it's too late." The silence between us was suffocating. He wanted me. I knew that. But for some reason, he was determined to pull away, to build barriers I didn't understand, and I wasn't going to accept that. "What are you afraid of?" My voice softened. He closed his eyes for a second, as if he were fighting something within him. And when he finally responded, his voice came out hoarse. "Of losing." The words hung between us like distant thunder. He wasn't running from me. He was running from the pain he believed was inevitably tied to me. But what he didn't realize was that the real risk wasn't losing me. It was never allowing me to stay. The sound came first, a distant noise, almost unreal. A buzz in the sky that made my heart stop for a second before it raced. We ran out of the forest, our feet sinking into the wet sand of the beach. And then we saw it. A plane, flying over the island. "My God," someone whispered beside me, but I could barely hear. Everything slowed down. People screamed, waved, did everything to get attention. The sound of a flare shot by one of the survivors echoed through the air. The plane spun in the sky. They saw us. Help was coming. My body should have been filled with relief, and for a moment it was. But then I looked at him, and what I saw made the ground disappear beneath my feet. He didn't look relieved. His gaze was fixed on the plane, but his expression was unreadable. There was no joy. There was no despair. Just emptiness. My chest tightened. "You don't want to go, do you?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. He blinked, turning his gaze to me. "It's not about wanting," he murmured. "Then what is it?" He didn't answer right away. The plane was getting closer, and the people around were agitated, euphoric. But between us, there was only silence, and I understood. He belonged to that island more than he belonged to the real world. Here, he knew who he was, knew what to do. But out there was uncertain. Out there, he would have to face everything he had been avoiding. The plane began to land on the makeshift beach. The wind blew hard, lifting sand around us. I faced him, feeling my heart break even before knowing what his choice would be. Because maybe, for the first time, it wasn't survival that was at stake. It was the two of us. The sound of the rotors still buzzed in my ears when the rescue plane took off. I looked out the window, watching the island shrink into a small dot in the middle of the ocean. It felt surreal, as if everything we had lived there was part of a fever dream. The fear, the hunger, the sleepless nights. Him. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to organize the chaos inside me. But the truth was one. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back when we boarded the plane. He didn't try to stop me, didn't hold my hand. He just stood there, watching as if I were just another detail in the landscape. The pain of that absence was worse than any cold I felt in that cave. Because deep down, I knew. He chose distance. And now, I would have to learn to live with it. Civilization should have been a relief. Lights, voices, familiar faces. The warmth of a shower, the feeling of clean sheets against my skin. Everything I thought I missed. But nothing felt right. The apartment I lived in felt too big, too empty. The city was noisy, suffocating. People spoke to me as if I were a miracle, as if I should be happy to have survived. I should be happy. But all I felt was an emptiness in my chest that I couldn't name. And the worst part? He wasn't here. And perhaps he never would be again. Days went by, but I remained trapped in a place that no one could see. I was alive. I was back. I had everything I thought I missed. My bed, my routine, my life before the accident. But nothing felt right. The food had no taste. The conversations felt hollow. The walls of my apartment were cold, lacking the warmth of the fire, without the sound of waves crashing on the beach. Without him, he didn't try to find me. No messages, no calls. As if he had disappeared along with that island. And maybe that was what he wanted. I tried to move on. I tried to fill the void with work, with friends, with anything that would make me feel whole again. But the truth was simple and cruel. I was no longer the same person who boarded that plane. The island had changed me. He had changed me. And pretending that nothing had happened didn't make the absence of him disappear. Because every time I closed my eyes, all I could see was his intense gaze challenging me, pulling me close, and then letting me go. Maybe he had made his choice. But I still hadn't made mine. I found him. Or maybe he let me find him. After days of trying to ignore the truth, that I no longer belonged to this life without him, I began to search for him. I wasn't sure where or how, but I knew that someone like him wouldn't disappear without leaving traces. And I was right. I found him in a discreet bar on the less busy side of the city. Sitting in a corner with a forgotten beer on the table, he looked exactly the same. But at the same time, different. As if he were still on the island, as if he had never really come back. My heart thundered in my chest. But my feet kept moving forward. He saw me before I said anything. And then, that same tension filled the air. The same suffocating magnetism. As if we were back on the beach, the fire crackling between us, the wind carrying words we never said out loud. I stopped in front of him, and for a long second, no one said anything. Until he broke the silence. You came. There was something in his voice, an incredulity mixed with something deeper, as if he wanted to believe, but still wasn't sure I was real. I let out a trembling sigh. Of course I came. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were processing that. And when he opened them again, there was an intensity in them that made my breath catch, and in that moment, I knew. We survived the island. But now came the real challenge, discovering if what we had managed to save would also survive the real world. He didn't say anything right away, but I saw it, in his eyes, in the way his shoulders tensed, in the way his fingers slid over the bottle without any real intention of picking it up. He was fighting against something, against me, or against himself. You shouldn't be here, he said finally, his voice rough, heavy with something he couldn't hide. My heart squeezed, but I smiled. Small, without humor. You always say that when you want something, but you're afraid to admit it. He looked away, letting out a dry laugh. And you always insist on hearing only what you want. I took a step closer, challenging. Only when it's worth it. Silence. The bar around us disappeared. The voices, the low music, the whole world became small. It was just the two of us. He looked at me as if he were about to say something. Something definitive. Something that would end this doubt between us once and for all. But I didn't need words. Did you miss me? My voice came out softer than I expected. His jaw tightened. His breathing slowed. Does it matter? It matters to me. The truth spread in the air between us like a wildfire. He ran a hand over his face, exhausted. I tried. Trying not to miss me? I took another step closer, close enough to feel the warmth of his body, to see the exact moment when his self-control faltered. Yes, he whispered. My breath stopped. Then, without thinking, without hesitating, I did what I should have done since the moment I saw him sitting there. I touched his face. It was a simple gesture, but the effect was immediate. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, something changed. The struggle ended, and then he pulled me in. The kiss was not like the first one. It wasn't urgent, desperate. It was something deeper, more true. It was a confirmation. We survived the island. Now we just needed to survive each other.